Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the Gospel of John. We're still looking at John chapter 1. We've been examining the first 18 verses of chapter 1, which is the prologue to the Gospel. Now, so far we've looked at the first 13 verses, and we've seen that John identifies Jesus as the Word who was in the beginning, the Word who was with God, the Word who was God. Jesus is the Word. And as the Word comes into the world, he brings life and light into the world. And John's also told us about the Baptist, John the Baptist, who came as a witness to the light. He points us to the Word. And when we believe in Jesus, the Word, we're given the right, the authority to become the children of God. That was in the first 13 verses. Now in verses 14 and 15, John sort of powerfully summarizes what he just finished saying. These are powerful, powerful verses. John chapter 1, verses 14 and 15. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testified concerning him. He cried out, saying, "This is the one I spoke about when I said, 'He who comes after me has surpassed me, because he was before me.'" John pointed us to the Word, and the Word became flesh. It goes on to say the Word is the Son. The Word is Jesus, as we've already seen. But notice, the Word became flesh. He who was very God took upon himself human flesh. He became fully man. This is what we call the incarnation, that God, the Son, became incarnate. The Son of God, the eternal God, became human. He took upon himself full humanity. He became flesh. When we look at Jesus, we see he who is fully God, but also fully human. He was just as human as we are, and yet he was still fully God. He came to be one of us, that he might reveal God to us. Now, as he says, when we see the Son, we see the glory of the one and only Son. There's only one eternal Son of God. It's Jesus. And he comes to show us the Father, for he proceeds from the Father, full of grace and truth. Now, when it says the Word became flesh, it said he did so that he might make his dwelling among us, that he might live among us as one of us. Now, the word for dwelling there is the word for tabernacle. A literal translation would be the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. Remember in the Old Testament, when Moses brought the Israelites to Mount Sinai after the Exodus, Moses went up on the mountain to talk with God, and he received the instructions for building the tabernacle. You remember? The tabernacle was the place of worship, and the tabernacle represented the presence of God among the people. Remember, the very center of the tabernacle was the Holy of Holies, in which it was felt symbolically that the presence of God abided. So the tabernacle was the symbol to Israel that God is dwelling among us as his people. But now in the New Testament, Jesus is the tabernacle. In other words, God didn't just give us a place of worship to remind us that he's with us, but he came and dwelt among us, a living tabernacle. God is with us now. And when we worship him through Jesus. He is the living tabernacle of God, God dwelling among us. So the Word, the eternal God in the Son, became flesh, became human, that he might tabernacle among us, that he might dwell among us, that we might see fully who God is. So the Son proceeds from the Father and lives among us that we might know God. And John testifies about this. He said, I pointed to him because he's the one. He came before me. Now, actually, John was born before Jesus. A few months. John was older than Jesus. But he says, Jesus is before me. For Jesus is the eternal Son of God, now come as human. The Word has become flesh. Powerful verses. These are the center of all that the Gospel of John is going to tell us. All through the rest of his Gospel, he's going to give us the narrative of the life of Jesus that proves that authenticates, that demonstrates he is the Word, made flesh, come human, dwelling among us, that we might know grace and truth from God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Hope you join us tomorrow as we continue our 5-minute Bible study in the Gospel of John.